everybody, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I am going to be drawing a rose in colored pencil, and I'm going to be giving you guys as many tips as I can for how you can draw leaves and flowers in colored pencil. But if you do want to learn even more in real time and follow along with me, then as always I've got that available over on my Patreon in real time. Also, all of the materials that I'm using are in the description as well if you want to check them out and see what exactly I use for this piece. Anyway, let's get on with the tutorial. So when I'm drawing leaves, I like to have a few different shades of green. So I like to mix my greens so that it's not just one flat colour over the whole of the leaf. First, I like to add a base tone, and for this I used May Green. It was a nice kind of yellow green tone and it was a nice light colour to use. And then I went in with a darker green just to add some shadows. So like always, I was using a reference photo, and so I used this to create the accurate initial sketch and to help choose my colours. So like I said, I went in with a light green and then I used a dark green and a tiny bit of black where I wanted the shadows. So that was on the tiny leaf. And when I'm using black, I don't just leave it as black. I like to go over the top with a green so it just looks like a really dark shade of green rather than looking black. And this will help it stop looking too flat. It gives it a lot more depth. So now I'm working on the larger leaf, and again I went in with the black to establish the shadowed areas. On this leaf there was a lot of shadow at the bottom half of the leaf, so I really wanted to get in that black first, and then I went over the top with that darker green, like I said, to give it depth, stop it looking flat, and to stop it just looking black. And then I worked on the top of the leaf. I added that May Green again. I tried to use the same colours throughout the leaf so it looked like it was more consistent throughout the piece. And I'm focusing on all of those little shadows. Especially with leaves, they like crinkle in all different directions and have little bumps in them. And to get this sort of texture, you need to look at the placement of the shadows and the kind of shape of the shadows as well, to get it looking bumpy and not just smooth, to make it look a bit more interesting and more realistic. So I even went in and I added a bit of brown. It's important to look at your reference photo and notice other little colours that can help enhance your image. So I don't just want to use green on the leaves. I wanted to incorporate some brown tones and also some more like yellow brown tones, like a brown ochre or something like that, just to make it look even more realistic. If you guys struggle kind of figuring out what colours to use for your drawing, then I really recommend importing your reference photo into a software like Paint. And then I use the eyedropper tool to create little swatches of the colours that I want. And then I get my coloured pencil set and I compare it to the swatches I created on the computer to see which colours best match it. And I do recommend having a highlighted colour, mid-tone colour and a shadow colour so that you can create that contrast. It is so important if you're trying to go for realism to make sure you get in the contrast, which means that you have to have highlighted areas and those dark shadowed areas to create that contrast. So once I did that leaf, I left a little bit of white where I could create those jagged edges of the leaf. And this gives it a more realistic shape because leaves have those little tiny zigzaggy jagged edges. So I wanted to make sure I left a bit of white, which I will go over with the May Green in a minute. But for now, I'm working on the leaf just above that in the exact same way. I just use the exact same technique throughout the whole of these leaves, but obviously each leaf will have a different amount of shadow, different kind of lighting on it and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of colours, I use the exact same colours. So now I'm going over with that May Green, and I'm also using a darker green just to crispen up the edges of that leaf, just to make it really crisp and in focus. If you want a leaf to look out of focus, then you want to do more blurry fuzzy edges. But if you want it to look really crisp, then make sure that you have really clean cut edges. So again, I'm working on a dark leaf which is in a lot of shadow. So I'm starting to add a lot of black. I used a thicker layer of shading where it was really, really dark, and then I just used less and less pressure as I got towards those lighter areas. One key thing to do if you want to get a really smooth look is to make sure that your pencil is always sharp. So this is something that is easier to achieve with the Faber-Castell polychromos because they hold their point so nicely. You can keep that really defined point and that sharp point. Whereas with something like the Prismacolors or the Caran d'Ache Luminance, because they are so creamy and wax-based, they go blunter a lot quicker, so you have to keep sharpening them. So I really did like changing it up and using the Faber-Castell polychromos for this piece. Another thing is that when you're laying down the pencil, make sure you use little circular motions just to help get that even, smooth coverage. So I'm just continuing to finish off these leaves by adding the base tone, adding some shadows. Then I like to glaze over with that May green as well. And I like to use the highlighted colour to help add a final layer and blend everything together. As you build up more and more layers, you can apply more and more pressure to help burnish and blend all of the colours together to fill in all of that white grain of the paper. But again, when you're kind of blending everything out, make sure your pencil is really, really sharp. So now I'm working on the stem, and the stem had a lot more brown tones in it, especially towards the kind of end of the stem. So I made sure that I included some browns. These were the same browns that I used with the leaves as well to make it more consistent. And I also used like some brown ochres, some more yellow tones as well. I also made sure that I kind of preserved that highlight that was in the reference photo, and this helps give it more of a realistic look and makes it look a bit more shiny. But apart from that, I did the stem in the exact same way that I did the leaves, with the exact same green colours. So the leaf that I'm doing now was a lot lighter than the rest of the leaves, so I used a heavier layer of the lightest colour, which was May green, to start with, because I knew I wasn't going to add much darker shading over the top. And instead of using May green to burnish, with this one I used the white Caran d'Ache Luminance colour pencil, so that I could get more of a desaturated look and more of a pastel pale look to it. And this helped give a really creamy, smooth finish. So in the reference photo, that leaf had a lot of little tiny veins that you could see with the darker green. So I made sure that I went in with a darker green pencil just to put all of those little details and veins in. And this will really help it look realistic. Anyway, so that's all of the leaves and the stem done. And now I wanted to work on the petals of the rose. So as you can see, I like to work from left to right because this helps prevent me smudging all of the coloured pencil work, and it also means that you don't just smudge it everywhere. So I really recommend working that sort of way if you kind of are used to, well, if you want to keep it really clean, really. So like I said, now I'm working on the first petal, and I like to work on it petal at a time. And again, I picked a highlighted red tone, a mid-red tone, and a more shadowed red tone, and I picked these colours based on the swatches that I created on paint. And I first laid down the lightest red, and I left certain areas for the highlights, so when I blend it out with the red, those areas will stand slightly lighter than the rest, and I used the shadowed colour to create the shadows. So it's very much the same technique as the leaves, but obviously they're just red instead of green. And once I blended it out with that brighter red tone, I'm going back in and I'm fixing any details. I add a bit more shadow and I use that white pencil to create a few little highlights and details. But that's basically it for that technique, and now I'm just moving on to the darker petal underneath it. So this petal had a lot of dark shadow right at the bottom as it touched that leaf. So what I did was I used some black, but I glazed some red over the top just to make it not look flat like I said before. But again, I'm just going to go throughout all of these petals in the exact same way. It can be quite tricky when you're doing petals because there are so many and you have to look at all of the intricate little bits. But I recommend looking at them as little shapes rather than the fact that you're drawing a flower and that you're drawing petals, because a lot of them are really random, obscure sort of shapes. So if you're thinking about it as like the fact that you're drawing a flower, then you might get a bit confused and it might not turn out that well, and you might start to draw it how you think it should be drawn rather than how it actually looks. So now I'm just creating some finishing little touches, adjusting the contrast. So I'm adding the white pencil to any areas that need to be lighter, and I'm also adding those darker tones to areas that need to be a bit darker, and this helps just make it pop a bit more. Now I'm adding the shadow underneath the whole of the rose, and this really helps give it that three-dimensional look. So I laid a bit of black and then I blended it with the white Caran d'Ache pencil, and then I just darkened up some of the darker shadows and added a tiny bit of green. But that's basically it for this tutorial. If you're new to my channel and you want to see even more art videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon to be notified on my future videos. Anyway guys, I will see you in the next one. Bye!